session is on nutrition and spinal cord injury as we get a little bit older, and if we need to change things or if things change. And luckily, we have Sheldon Poirie, who is the registered dietitian for the spinal cord injury program at GF Strong. So he's gone out of his way to prepare this for us. I'm going to welcome him and let him get started.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Duncan. Hello, everyone. My name's Sheldon Poirie. I am the dietitian at GF Strong. Some of you may have seen me here before. I do cover the inpatient spinal cord injury program, as well as a couple other programs here, including our outpatient program. Duncan welcomed me and asked if I could present, and I'd love to share some information here related to nutrition and spinal cord injuries from what I've learned as a dietitian here at GF Strong. So I did just want to also leave a disclaimer that I have only been working with individuals with spinal cord injuries for the last 1.5 to 2 years, going on 2 years. So relatively speaking, I am quite new to this population, but I've learned quite a bit through the 1.5 to 2 years, and I'm sure many of you have an incredible amount of experience that I could learn from as well. So if you have any comments or anything like that, I'm more than welcome, more than happy to chat about it. So just as an overview of today's presentation, we'll first start off discussing Canada's food guide, review a little bit about weight and health, bowel and bladder, bone health, protein and the importance of protein in our diet, some available resources in the community that many of you I'm sure have already heard of, and then questions as well. We'll just have a Q&A period. I'll try to be done at least 15 minutes before, so that I can answer any of your outstanding questions that you may have. With that being said, today's presentation, it is relatively general. We're covering a fair number of topics, and I've tried to include some of the questions that Duncan provided from you guys that you had during your discussion. So I've either incorporated them or I've left a couple of them to the very end that I'll just answer outright. So if I haven't quite answered them, but they came up in the discussion, they might just be at the very end. So many of you it sounds like you've seen it in one form or another, which is great. And as you may know, Canada's Food Guide it's not a new guide. It's not a new concept. It's just developed through time with the latest research and the latest nutrition evidence that we have. So you may have seen the pyramid and then a rainbow. And now, as of 2019, the most recent one is what we call our healthy plate model. So this plate that's in front of you that kind of divides our diet into three food groups. So by no means is this an exhaustive plate. Just shows some foods, but it's just to give you an example or an idea of what our plate should look like in an ideal world. With half of our plate being fruits and vegetables, where it's a great source of fiber, rich in vitamins and minerals, including a variety of colors in there. A portion or a quarter of our plate being our grains or whole grain foods, so things like whole grain pastas and breads, rice, quinoa. So these grains that are rich in fiber, once again, vitamins and minerals, and then our protein foods. So aiming for those leaner meats, are eggs, dairy, fatty fish like salmon, cod, or lentils or beans or peas. So a variety of plant-based and or meat-based proteins. But once again, it's just a general picture. If you take a visit to their website at the very bottom, it provides much more information and context to each. And I hope to provide you with some of that information today as well. But I should also mention that this is what we call our ideal plate, the healthy plate that we want to aim for. But nobody's diet often looks like this, right? Very infrequently do we divide our food groups as such, into these three quarters. So that's something that I want to touch on is, what our plate could look like while still meeting these recommendations, while keeping in mind that not everybody is at the point where they're consuming, this plate model where they're having a half fruits and vegetables, a quarter grains, and a quarter proteins, bearing in mind that this would be our goal. And this is what we want to aim for. So what are some sustainable food choices that we can make, that we can do indefinitely into the future in order to get there? A simple substitution of our potato chips after dinner that we like to snack on with maybe a little bit of low-fat Greek yogurt and some berries. Maybe we can do that twice a week for 3 weeks, and then how can we advance that in the coming weeks and coming months so that we can take these these reasonable steps towards this plate. All right. So just going to what could our meal look like? So we could simply just divide our food, the meal that we make, into those 4 food groups, right? We choose a vegetable. In the image here, we got 1 pan baked chicken with potatoes and broccolini. And we got our vegetables. We have some starch, being the potatoes, and then we have our lean protein, being a chicken breast, a baked chicken breast, or chicken thigh or something like that. So easy enough. We divide it into the food groups. It represents Canada's food guide quite simply. But for most meals that we have, it doesn't often look like this. So we also want to consider that, and what are some changes that we can make in our diet to reflect the guide itself. So something like a lasagna, right? Often things are mixed together in one meal where it doesn't really look like Canada's food guide, but there are ways that we can make it look like that healthy plate. For example, in this image here, you see they added a side salad and they chose whole grain pasta instead of white pasta. Or you could add something like, broccoli or diced broccoli and diced mushrooms into the actual lasagna to kind of make it a little bit more rich in those vegetables versus, choosing a side salad. Choosing lower fat cheese or adding cottage cheese, it's higher in protein, lower in fat to the lasagna. Using blended or diced tomatoes instead of some pre-made tomato sauce. So we can always make some adjustments to the food that we're consuming versus creating an entire new menu for ourselves. All right. So off to meal planning. So it's great. We know what we should eat, what our plate should look like, but how do we do that and how can we execute it? And I know for myself, meal planning is something that I stand truly with because it does really make the difference when it comes to making those what we call healthy choices or making those choices that are in line with the food guide. So it might take a little bit of work and preparation ahead of time, but it saves us effort in the long run. And it can also allow us to make more informed choices than deciding right there and then what we want, where we might, maybe not make the best food choice at that time, versus if we go into it with a plan, we can strategize a little more. So here on the page, you see it's just a screenshot of a website called Unlock Foods. It was created by the Dietitians of Canada, run by the Dietitians of Canada, where they provide a number of useful things from recipe ideas to individual meal plans to even a grocery list. So the way it works is where you would go on the website, it asks you a bunch of screening questions on what your preferences are, allergies and tolerances. If you're vegan, vegetarian, you're looking for certain types of products in your food. It'll then populate a list of hundreds of recipes. You can choose from those recipes, whether simple meals or more complex, and then it'll populate a grocery list, which you can then take to the grocery store with you versus having to actually create it yourself. But by no means is this the only resource available. There are a number of others, including cookspiration.com at the bottom, very similar to Unlock Foods, once again, developed by Dietitians of Canada. We also have Meal Lime, Plan to Eat, healthy meal plans, so on and so forth. So choose which one works best for you if you think that's the route that you want to take. But just some useful resources in helping us plan meals. There's also many apps on your phone that you can use now, which can also help with this, which some of these are available in app format too. Sorry, and I apologize. I don't have the comment section up. Let me take a look. If there are any comments, I'll do my best to answer them throughout. Otherwise, I can just answer them at the end. Duncan, could you let me know if there's any comments? For some reason, it's not showing on my screen here.
There are no comments yet, and
Okay.
usually we wait till the end to ask questions.
Okay.
So I think
Sound-
that if people might be thinking that, because that's what we usually do.
Sounds good. All right. So the next topic that I would kind of want to talk about is, weight and spinal cord injuries. As I know, there were some questions about this. It often comes up in my practice, whether intentionally or not, as weight's relevant to people without spinal cord injuries, but also those with spinal cord injuries. It is something that if we have excess weight, it can increase our risk for things like diabetes, heart disease, making breathing a little bit more challenging, can cause more pain in some of our joints, increasing our risk for injuries. And even spinal cord injury specific, it can increase difficulty with transfers if we have excess weight, making equipment sizing quite challenging, maybe even requiring new equipment because of significant weight changes and gain or loss, which can come at additional cost. And then also pressure injuries. With more weight, that can lead to increased risk for pressure injuries, which then comes with its own challenges. And by no means is this an exhaustive list, just bearing in mind that excess weight gain, beyond what we'd call the healthy range, can increase our risk for these types of morbidities. So what does a healthy weight look like with spinal cord injuries? So I have a graph here that we just took from the part of the Living with SCI, which shows a pretty good representation of, on average, what individuals with spinal cord injuries may experience after a traumatic injury. So once again, this is not what everyone's weight journey looks like, but just an example of what we see on average, where within the first few months, if you follow the red line, you see often quite a significant decline from someone's normal body weight. That's where the injury first happened, their body's trying to recover, their metabolism is a little bit higher, and their body's really working to use its stores to recover from that injury. However, over the next year, 2 years, even up to the next decade, we often see a trend up past an individual's usual body weight, so up in this direction here. So that bears the question of, what should my weight be and what is, a healthy weight? So we often talk about someone's what we call normal weight. So for example, in this graph here, just say someone weighs 70 kilograms before their injury. So we talk about this idea of establishing a new normal weight or a new usual weight. And that depends on an individual's level of injury, their type of injury. Is it complete? Is it incomplete? So for those that experience a complete paraplegia, it's often recommended for them to lose 4.5 to 7 kilos or 5 to 10% of their weight. And then those with a complete tetra or quad, it's often a little bit higher at the 7 to 9 kilos or 10 to 15%. of their usual weight. With that being said, though, it's not, those numbers are just general estimations. They're not for everyone. And they're not specific to each person, as everyone's usual weight before their injury is different than the person next to them. Some people are a little bit lighter than others or a little bit heavier. So that may mean that those general recommendations are skewed in one way or the other. So we know what a healthy weight should look like, or we have an idea of what a healthy weight should look like. So how do we achieve it? How much should we be consuming on a day-to-day basis? So what are the estimated caloric needs with a spinal cord injury? So on the screen here, there's a couple numbers thrown up that are general estimations for those that are a tetra versus a para. So someone that's a tetra, we estimate around 22.7 kilocalories per kilo, or calories per kilogram. So if you're to take that number, 22.7, multiply it by your weight in kilos, that would be around the number of calories to consume. And for someone that's a para, it would be 27.9 calories per kilogram. However, these are just general estimations. They're not the most accurate. So the most accurate methods being our direct, or what we call indirect calorimetry. However, these aren't often available in the community, at least for free. Some clinics in Vancouver do offer indirect calorimetry, where they measure your basal metabolic rate, and then they may multiply it by some kind of activity factor or stress factor, and then that would determine how many calories to consume. However, it's once again not always available, and in hospital, it's usually only available in an acute care setting like the ICU or something of that sort. So I also wanted to bring your attention to the image on the right-hand side, as I found it on the Living with SCI website. And I think it provides some good insight to the weight gain versus weight loss paradigm, where we have kind of two opposing things that that we're trying to work on, our calories in versus our calories out. And this diagram represents, our calories in from food, which is where we get that, which is true. The only way our body gets calories is from food. However, I think it's a little oversimplified. So I don't want you to take this diagram as, the end all be all, being that, the food that we consume, yes, it's simply just what we put in our mouth. However, there's many factors that influence that, from social factors to cultural factors, behavioral, genetics, our metabolism, our medication that one may be taking. These all influence what we call our calories in, or the calories our body burns calories our body needs on a daily basis, versus weight loss, which would be the calories we burn by, in the graph it says exercise, but once again, I think a little bit oversimplified, as there are other ways to reduce or change that portion of the scale, not just exercise. However, exercise is good for our overall health and can help us lose weight if that's the goal. So just keep in mind, it's not just food and exercise, but I think they're two very important factors in that weight management paradigm. All right, so I just figured I would throw a few practical recommendations or considerations when it comes to weight management. By no means is this an exhaustive list, but things that we want to keep in mind when we are aiming to lose weight, or even gain weight. For some people, weight gain is sometimes realistic. So with that being said, the first thing on there I mentioned was portion control, being that monitoring our portions can have a significant influence on how much we consume, the overall calories that we eat in a day. Bearing in mind that just because we choose smaller portions doesn't necessarily mean that we're consuming less calories. We want to be mindful of the types of foods that we're consuming too. So things like nutrient-dense foods, like your fruits, your vegetables, that have higher amounts of fiber, vitamins, and minerals, lower calories, versus our more processed foods or calorie-dense foods that you might find on the shelves, or even, meat, for example. A lot more calories in a smaller amount versus your fruits and vegetables. You can get a large portion in, or fewer calories in a large portion. So your plate might look bigger, but if the majority of it is fruits and vegetables, you may actually be getting less calories. Um, so being mindful of the portions, uh, aiming for small, frequent meals. So in general, we recommend 2 to 3 meals plus snacks between, the idea being that helps us regulate our appetite and control our portions a little bit better. If we're consuming 1 to 2 large meals a day, that can lead to us eating less desirable foods depending on what our signals our body's sending us. This is not an ideal meal pattern for everyone. Everyone has a different method to what works best for them. And for you guys, you probably know what works best for you. But if weight management is something you struggle with and you're unsure of how many meals to have, it's a good start. Having a couple, 2 to 3 meals a day with a few snacks in between. Something we also want to ask ourselves is, why are we eating? So there's a couple signals that our body sends to us that we want to be mindful of. One being our hunger and the other our appetite. Often these get mixed up with one another or used interchangeably, but there is a distinct difference. Hunger being our body telling us that we need to eat. So for example, you go to bed, 8 p.m. was your last meal. You wake up, it's 8 a.m. Your stomach's growling, it's hungry. You're feeling that sensation of, I need to eat. So that's likely your body telling you you're hungry, versus your appetite, which is your desire to eat. After a meal, you're watching TV, maybe a little bored, and you feel the need to have some, potato chips or cookies or something along those lines, which I'm not saying those are bad things to have. I think they can be a part of a balanced diet. However, in that situation, that's likely our desire to eat rather than our need to eat. So there are strategies that we can use to differentiate the two, which kind of leads me to the fourth bullet point on there, which is staying hydrated, which drinking enough water throughout the day can help us regulate our appetite a little bit. And also it's just good for our overall health. For bowel and bladder management, staying hydrated is imperative. All right, so that was weight management. So the next thing that I wanted to briefly review, which I believe there was also a question on, was heart health and spinal cord injuries. So what is the risk of heart disease within the context of spinal cord injuries? So something to consider is that, whether spinal cord injury or not, there are many contributing factors to heart disease or cardiovascular disease. By no means is this an exhaustive list, once again, but things like obesity or excess weight, diabetes, hypertension or high blood pressure, high cholesterol, genetics or your family history. These are all factors that can increase the risk for cardiovascular disease. However, there is some evidence to suggest that there are some spinal cord injury specific mechanisms, including chronic inflammation and autonomic dysreflexia associated with the spinal cord injury. So these are not always controllable factors. However, the nutrition recommendations are basically the same for those with spinal cord injuries and those without spinal cord injuries. So eating a balanced diet, aiming for Canada's food guide, including some of each food group, limiting our consumption of processed foods, physical activity to what degree that's possible for you, whether it's, upper body exercises or not, and then just considering what a healthy weight looks like for you. All right. So moving on to bowel and bladder. So this is something that I cover as for inpatients, especially when patients are here with a new spinal cord injury. But I think it's still relevant as we get older, even with long-term spinal cord injuries. They're still relevant on a day-to-day basis. So I figured I'd review them a little bit as well. So there are a couple goals that we want to keep in mind when it comes to bowel and bladder management from a nutrition perspective. So one being a predictable routine. So a predictable routine, not only encompasses a predictable bowel routine, like the bowel medication that you're on, whether it's every day, every other day, every 3 days, everyone's different there, but also a predictable routine when it comes to our diet. So specifically, our meal pattern and also our fluid intake. If we are having significant fluctuations in our meal pattern from one large meal a day to 5 small meals to 3 meals, those significant changes on a daily basis can influence the predictability of our bowels, and as well as hydration. If you're drinking all your fluid at one time and nothing later on in the day, that may significantly influence your bladder and or bowels, versus spreading the fluid out throughout the day, and trying to aim for those targets on a consistent basis. And then once again, consistent intake of fiber and fluid. So fiber being our plant-based foods, and then once again staying hydrated with our fluids, whether it comes from water or other sources. So on the topic of fluid intake, generally speaking, we encourage people to aim for 8 cups of fluid per day. Ideally, half of that, or 50%, being water, while limiting sugary beverages like juice, pop, sports drinks, especially, unless you're involved in sports where you're sweating quite often, we want to limit those sorts of things. Bearing in mind that this is a general recommendation, more specifically, we'd use a number of milliliters per kilogram of weight. So in general, we aim for 25 to 35 mils per kilogram of weight. So that gives more of a prescribed or an individual recommendation for fluid. Usually the lower end is for those that are a little bit older, and then the higher end is for those that are a little younger. We also have caffeine. It's a part of a lot of our daily routines, including mine. I absolutely love having my daily coffee. So we often encourage no more than 3 cups of coffee a day. 300 to 400 milligrams of caffeine is demonstrated to be safe for the general population. So we typically find that amount in 3 cups of coffee if that 1 cup is about 8 ounces, or short at Starbucks, for example. If your cup's a little bit bigger or smaller, that number of cups can change. A question that also often comes up, especially with new injuries, is cranberry juice or pills. Is it beneficial to prevent UTIs? And unfortunately, right now, the current evidence suggests that there's no benefit really to preventing UTIs. However, some people do find anecdotal benefits. So personal experiences where they may find some benefit in taking the pills or juice. So it kind of brings up the idea of the power of placebo. If we believe if it works, it potentially can work. Not that I'm saying to take a type of pill like cranberry juice or any other supplements because of that. I'm a strong supporter of evidence-based practice, but just bearing in mind that we do sometimes see these individual, people find individual benefits despite the lack of clinical evidence per se. All right, so what about fiber? So fiber is, it's the bulk in our diet. It's primarily sourced from plant-based foods, and we want to aim to consume anywhere from 25 to 38 grams a day. Higher end being more for men, and the lower end more so for women. But bearing in mind that the amount that we consume may need to change based on stool consistency. Whether, if we're struggling with loose stool or hard stool, we may need to change the amount of fiber and also the type of fiber that you're consuming to then help with the stool consistency. So there are 2 kinds of fiber that we often talk about. One being soluble fiber, meaning that it's soluble in water, it absorbs water when you put it in, and then the other being insoluble fiber. So it's not soluble or it doesn't dissolve in water. In fact, it actually draws water in. So, if we're thinking about it in our colon, eating soluble fiber will kind of swell up and then it absorbs water, so it can bring more form to the stool versus insoluble fiber kind of draws water in from outside the colon in, and so that can actually allow to soften up the stool. So as you can imagine, soluble potentially helps a little bit more with loose stool, insoluble a little bit more with hard stool. And something to consider is always your fluid intake. If you're adding extra fiber into your diet, especially from where you are and going up, we always want to make sure we're adding more fluid because as I just described, fiber has such an influence on the water in our colon that we want to make sure that we're replacing what we may be losing. So just a non-exhaustive list of the sources of each type of fiber. So our soluble, you often find it in the inner flesh of the plant. So the inner flesh of fruits, it's quite high in oats, legumes, lentils, beans, your vegetables, a variety of them are quite high in soluble fiber, and even supplements like Metamucil, or more specifically psyllium being the plant itself. And then we have the insoluble fiber, which you'll find in the skin of the fruit, or vegetable. You can also find it quite high in bran, nuts and seeds, whole grains. Bearing in mind that soluble versus insoluble, they're not often found in isolation. We typically find them in combination with one another in plants. So you can very infrequently can we consume just one or just the other unless you're having it in supplement form. You'll just find some foods are higher in some than the other, as outlined on this slide here. So it's important to have a combination of the two. All right, so just a quick slide on bone health and the importance of specific nutrients related to our bones. So the two most common nutrients that we refer to when we talk about bone health, although there are many others that do influence our bones, the two highest, once again discussed and talked about ones are calcium and vitamin D. So calcium, we typically think of it as sourced from dairy products, some milk, cheese, yogurt, but we can also find it in other sources like fortified beverages, your almond milks, your oat milks, even some juices. Keep in mind that they're in Canada, the alternative milks, we don't have mandatory fortification. So you just want to read the food label to see if there is actually additional calcium and vitamin D in there. And then our non-dairy foods are, tahine, legumes, fish with bones, so canned fish more specifically is a good source of calcium as well. We generally recommend for people to aim for anywhere from 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams a day. And then vitamin D, on the other hand, which supports calcium and our bone health, once again, it's unfortunately can be quite challenging to meet through our diet, getting adequate amounts. Although it's often quite high in dairy products as it's fortified, the average person doesn't typically eat or drink enough milk or have enough dairy or fortified beverages to meet those needs. So it's one of the few vitamins that we typically recommend people to supplement. Obviously as needed, but it's one of the most frequent supplements that we recommend. And the recommended intake is anywhere from 600 to 800 international units a day. Right, so what about protein? So protein is an essential nutrient which everybody needs. We all need a significant amount. As outlined by Canada's Food Guide, we have our, it's less of a food group in the sense of meat. It's more of a food group in the sense of a nutrient. So your beans, your lentils, your meats, poultry, fish, eggs, we want to include a variety in our diet as best as we can. And so aiming to include some at each meal and snack, I think is quite important. So when it comes to spinal cord injuries, protein needs do increase short term, initially upon the injury, within the first few months, depending on the level of injury, what other injuries may have happened during that time, the protein needs may go up. However, long term, our protein needs do not go up with spinal cord injuries versus without spinal cord injuries. However, if wounds are present, then protein needs do go up. The worse the wounds, the higher the protein needs go up. So what about muscles and protein? As this is something that, once again, often comes up in practice, is that, do I need to eat more protein to stop my body from losing muscle? And the answer is yes and no. So eating a high protein diet is not going to prevent muscle wasting in spinal cord injuries, especially below what we say below the level of injury. So often seen in the lower extremities, if just by eating a high protein diet or excessive proteins beyond what we would typically recommend, that's not going to prevent the muscle wasting. And it's this idea of if we don't move it, we lose it. So just keep in mind that we want to include enough protein in our diet, but going overboard on it is not going to necessarily make a difference on that front. However, protein needs do go up with to help support muscle growth in the realm of resistance training or exercise in general. So if you are exercising quite frequently, especially with weights or resistance exercises, then your protein needs may be a little bit higher. And the general recommendation is to aim for 10 to 35% of your total daily calories to come from protein. If we were to do it on a per kilo basis, it would be about 0.8 to 1 gram per kilogram, obviously higher for wounds and higher for muscle growth as well. So that's it for the general content of the presentation, but just a few key points just to summarize what we kind of talked about. Aiming for Canada's Food Guide, considering the healthy plate, what are some realistic goals that we can set in order to achieve that healthy plate? And that may require working with a dietitian or a nutrition expert in order to set those goals. But we also want to consider what a healthy weight looks like for us, if weight loss or, once again, I know we didn't discuss this in detail today, but weight gain for some people is necessary. Aiming for adequate hydration, drinking 8 cups of water and getting enough fiber, so 25 to 38 grams. And then just including adequate calcium in our diet through calcium-rich foods and protein-rich foods to support healing and muscle growth. So a few resources that you may have heard of already, one of them being Spinal Cord Injury Research Evidence, the SCIRE, which they have a pretty good source of nutrition information. So if you're interested in additional nutrition relevant content, you can take a look there, as well as Living with SCI. A fair bit of the content that I provided for you referenced Living with SCI. You can also contact a dietitian by dialing 811, which is the nurse's hotline, I believe, but you can still go through the sequence and speak with a dietitian over the phone. You can also visit HealthLink BC. They have some great resources on there, all evidence-based recommendations when it comes to nutrition. And just a screenshot of Living with SCI. This is the front of the nutrition page. It will provide a little bit more detail on some of the topics that we talked about today. And then SCIRE. So once again, some credible content, evidence-based, provides some great nutrition relevant information.
Okay. Fantastic, Sheldon. I wrote down some questions as we were going along, and I know that Karen had one that she put in the chat box.
Actually, I was just asking about the vitamin D. 6,800 seems quite low. It seems consistent now between 1,000 and 2,000, and also taking with vitamin K for better absorption. Is that on track, on trend, or?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so for vitamin D supplementation, usually one pill or one dose would be considered 1,000 units. So usually people are encouraged to take 1 to 2,000. It's hard to say how much you should be taking unless you've had your serum vitamin D levels tested. So you're obviously lower, you'd want to have more, versus if you're within the normal range, we'd usually recommend just 1,000 units. So I think it's person to person dependent, but a good starting point is the 1,000 to 2,000 units. So the RDA is what we call the recommended daily intake or amount is the 600 to 800 international units. So that's what evidence has shown that we should consume on a daily basis in order to prevent deficiency.
All right, and does that answer your question, Karen?
It does.
Okay, Paul, you just popped up a question in the chat box.
Okay, yeah. Is it important to consume fiber first to prep the intestine for absorption? I've heard that the order of food consumption is important in a meal because it helps with digestion.
That's a good question, and I think it's come up quite often in my practice. In general, for what a healthy individual or someone without GI issues, the order of food should not matter. The transit between consuming it and it coming out of us, for those with spinal cord injuries, it's anywhere from 24 to up to 72 hours. Individually, it might be shorter or longer. So it's adequate time for our body to digest the foods. However, I think consuming them in a particular order, like high fiber and your high protein foods first, can help with managing our appetite and managing our portion size. So from a weight management perspective, having those satiating foods first can make a difference. So I don't think it's absolutely necessary for digestion, but I do believe that having them first can benefit from portion control. And then there's obviously other areas where it could benefit having them in an order, like diabetes management, but more individualized, something that you'd want to talk to one-on-one with the dietitian about.
Okay, and then I have one that has come up. It's not my question necessarily, but it has come up in our discussion group, and I would generalize it a little bit, but it was about Ozempic and whether that can help you lose weight, or expanding that to kind of the question is, to me, is if you can't get any exercise, is there some kind of supplement that can help you lose weight at the same time?
I think that's a great question. So I'm not going to speak outside of my scope of practice. Talking about medication I would say is a good question for your family physician or your doctor. However, I will say that medication can be used as an adjunct to weight management in combination with diet. Evidence has shown that Ozempic can help with weight loss, but it's not necessarily a magic pill in the sense that it's going to boost your metabolism. It works through basically the mechanism of suppressing your appetite, so you're not as hungry. And if you're not as hungry, you are likely to eat less food and therefore eating less calories, which then can lead to weight loss. So it's not necessarily what called magic pill. And are there any supplements to help with weight loss? Right now, I don't think there's strong evidence to suggest that there are any, especially safe supplements. So there are a lot of traditional Chinese medicine or Chinese supplements, high doses of caffeine in certain products that are sold as weight loss supplements, and I don't think the evidence is there. And unfortunately, some of them have been shown to be harmful to some of our organ systems, like our liver, in high doses. So just be mindful of that when taking some additional supplements. So to answer it just more plainly, no, I don't think there's any supplements to help with the weight loss per se.
Okay, and then you said talking to your doctor, would it be better though with a spinal cord injury to talk to a physiatrist about the weight loss potential of medications?
I think they're both a good resource. I work with physiatrists here, and I think they're quite knowledgeable on the topic of medication. So I think you'd have to ask them to see if they have a strong opinion or strong background in those meds. to really find that out. So I don't know if it would be better or worse to go to one versus the other. I think just asking the question and then they can direct you from there would be
Great.
most helpful.
I have a question. I know the Canada Food Guide has been out there for years and years and years. And the one question I have is that when you look at the Canada Food Guide, or I don't know if it's changed a bit, it looked like it might have changed a little bit, but the amounts that are recommended in the Canada Food Guide, should they be adjusted for somebody with a spinal cord injury to a little bit, to a degree?
I think that's a fantastic question, Duncan, because the plate is, I would say it's quite general, right? It's a large plate, a piece of paper. It could probably fit the size of most of our our head. My head could for sure fit on that plate, on that handout that's distributed. So the plate, I think it's less about the plate per se than the food on the plate. So smaller portion, having a smaller plate, I think is important. With spinal cord injuries, having less ability, sometimes having less ability to burn more calories, means that smaller portions may be more beneficial. Do I think that you need a different plate or a different guide for it? No, because I think the principle is the same of what foods to choose. And I think that's more so what the guide is suggesting is we should be aiming for these more nutrient dense, lower calorie, higher protein, higher fiber foods, versus, the overall portion per se. However, choosing a smaller plate is a great way to reduce the number of calories.
Okay, I think my last question is one that's come up a lot of times just in discussion, and that's the effect of sugar.
Hmm.
And
The-
what does it do? Is it, should we be reducing the amount of sugar that we put into ourselves every day? And what effect would that have?
Yeah, so when it comes to sugar, the general recommendation is to consume less than 10% of your daily calories as added sugar. So that doesn't include your fruits, your natural sugars that you find in food. So this includes more like candies, juices, that sort of thing. So I think sugars are completely normal to have. I think they can be a part of a healthy diet. Do they affect individuals with spinal cord injuries any different than someone without? I'm not aware of any evidence to suggest that that's true. And I don't think they're inherently bad for us, bearing in mind that the source of the sugar, I think, is the most important thing. Is it coming from something that's quite satiating, like a fruit or vegetable that has those vitamins, minerals, and that fiber that can help keep us full? Or is it coming from, a chocolate bar that's, it's not as satiating, it's quite high in fat, it's calorie dense, but doesn't provide those, as many nutrients. So the overall value of the sugar from the fruit is going to weigh a little bit more heavily on the side of benefit than that chocolate bar would. So yeah, I don't think there's anything inherently bad about sugar though, per se, unless someone has diabetes and blood sugar management is something that they're working on. For just the general population, I wouldn't be too concerned.
You've said that vitamin D is a supplement that we should probably take. Are there any other vitamins or supplements that we should be taking or shouldn't be taking?
Yeah, that's a great question. Are there vitamins that someone should be taking? I think that depends on the person. So getting the majority of your nutrients from your diet, I think, is the most valuable way to get them. There is something to say about the food matrix and getting those vitamins and minerals in combination with everything else, like the fiber, the protein in there, because our body does digest it, deal with it differently in the sense it has to digest it, extract it, and then use it. So I think getting it from food is the first recommendation that I would say. However, if an individual's diet is lacking in a particular nutrient like magnesium or like calcium, then supplementation may be required. So that's where working one-on-one with a dietitian or a nutrition expert would really come in handy, to then make those recommendations on, maybe adding some foods that can increase that nutrient or potentially adding a supplement. Yeah. So otherwise, I mean, are there any other supplements that I think would be have negative side effects? Vitamin, I think in general, excessive supplements in general are in quite high doses. So they can have negative effects on our organs over the long term, depending on which one and how much. So something that I would review with, your dietitian or doctor as well, on what you want to take and what that could mean. Because some people that are higher risk for things like kidney stones, vitamin C might not be recommended versus calcium or other supplements. So I think it's quite individual on what shouldn't be consumed.
Hey, that's fantastic.
I see a question. What about healthy fats? Yeah, thanks, Karen, for your question. So what about healthy fats? Yeah, I think healthy fats, as in, I'm assuming you mean like, oils and, fish. Is that correct?
Yeah, like I'm assuming, you've got your protein and everything else. I'm assuming healthy fats are part of like a satiating meal. Avocado, nuts, seeds. Again, I guess because those are a bit caloric dense, but adding healthy fats, I'm assuming is a good thing.
Absolutely. I think for our overall health, having those healthy fats, like you alluded to, the avocados, the nuts and seeds, fatty fish, your omega-3s, they're great for our, they're essential nutrients our body needs. So getting them, I think, is imperative. But also there's other things that you're getting from those foods than just those fats, versus, let's just say adding extra oil to your cooking, it may not provide as much than having it in food form, where we could, help, bring those added oils or butter down, and that can help reduce our calorie intake within the context of weight management. Although, if we were to have within the context of weight management, once again, healthy fats are great, but if we're having excessive amounts of nuts and seeds and, having a couple avocados a day, the calories add up. So I think portions is really where that where that topic goes. So we can include it, and I think they're fantastic. Just being mindful of the amount, because at the end of the day, they are quite calorie dense for sure.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Karen?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Anybody else while we're here? And while we've got Sheldon on the line or on the screen?
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
I've had troubles with using supplements, especially calcium and vitamin D. They really impact my bladder a lot. The calcium for sure really changes the pH. So I can't just take those regular supplements like that without it impacting something else. Is there another way of getting a good dose of calcium? I know I don't want to eat like 50 pounds of broccoli or almonds or something like that, but I tried to use Tums, and I don't know if that's giving me enough for like a daily amount or what.
Yeah, that's a good question. So are there other sources? I mean, supplementally, there are other versions of calcium that you could take, although I don't think that'll necessarily have a difference on the influence on your bladder. However, if getting it from food is what I would recommend. So dairy products, so low fat yogurts, milks, things like even, alternative milks, almond milk, oat milk, those sorts of beverages where they're fortified in there, but in not as high quantities where it would have such an influence on one's bladder. So it doesn't have to come from plants, it can be, once again, dairy products is the richest, but there are the fortified drinks that you can find it in. And there are also some fortified foods, just using the food label, looking for something that is a good source can very much help. So I think that's where working with a dietitian can definitely play a role.
Okay, so is there I don't know if you know anything about bowel management, but you talked about how the food processes in a matter of 24 hours. So is there a relative difference between whether you do bowel management more often or less often relative to weight or what you eat and what nutrition you absorb?
Yeah, so I will say, so when it comes to the food transit through our intestines, you know, from consumption to producing stool and expelling that, you know, in 24 hours to it's, you know, it's usually 1 to 3 days, so 24 hours to 72. Everyone's a little bit different, and it also might depend on, you know, what you're consuming, so the amount of fiber. You know, if you consumed, you know, lactose, if you're lactose intolerant, that may hasten the transit time because your GI just can't handle it. So when it comes to routine for bowels, I think that really is dependent on what works best for you and your lifestyle. If a daily routine is most convenient to reduce the risks or the frequency of accidents, you know, that might be necessary. Or if every other day works best for you just for quality of life and your actual daily routine and what your schedule looks like. So I think that's where working with, you know, not only a dietitian, but also like a nurse can really help. You know, we have here at GF Strong, we do have nurses that are specialized in the bowel schedules and bowel management. So I think that can definitely have an influence. When it comes to the diet, though, just being consistent with how much you're consuming and try not to make that significant of a change overnight. So if you're going to add fiber, you know, taking your time and adding it, you know, adding a little bit at a time versus, you know, a large dose all at once. A good example is adding supplements like Metamucil or Psyllium, that large amount all at once. If you're going from, you know, 10 grams of fiber in your daily intake to now doubling that to 20, that can then significantly impact your bowels versus, you know, starting with 1 dose or starting with a few extra fruits a day. So, does that answer your question, Paul?
Yeah, it did. I mean, I just sort of wonder, I mean, there's a lot of people that have colostomies and I wonder, do they have to follow a different diet because they have colostomies compared to me that I don't? And if I was to get one, would I have to change? And does that make, you know, does somebody with a colostomy, because it comes out automatically, I believe, I really have no idea about it. And I don't know if that makes a difference to their weight as well.
Yeah, when it comes to diet and colostomies, there's really no difference. I think the recommendations are the same. We still want to have the fiber. Keeping in mind that recommending the fiber the fiber recommendations that I made today is not necessarily spine specific. It's simply, you know, for everyone's, the 25 to 38 grams a day is for everyone, whether a spinal cord injury or not. We still want to make sure we get that fiber because it's not only good for our bowels, but also, you know, something that often comes up is the gut microbiome or, you know, our gut microflora. You know, those bacteria, those healthy bacteria feed off the fiber and then influence the rest of our body. So it's not just the bowels per se, it's many other things that fiber is beneficial for. So, but colostomy wise, whether you go down the road of colostomy or not, I would still encourage the same you know, manipulations in your diet, depending on if it's loose or not, and encouraging just having adequate fiber.
Can I ask one more thing then? If you talked about the gut microbiome, and that is depleted when we take antibiotics. So do you recommend probiotics or a certain food group to help restore that microbiome?
Having fiber in general, I think, is important to help restore and bring back your gut microbiome after taking antibiotics. When it comes to probiotics, I think there's a lot of research that has to be done still on probiotics and our gut health. You know, I think we still don't know a lot about the gut microbiome and different probiotics and their benefits. So I'm hesitant to recommend probiotics, but there are some products out there that suggest that they are, you know, can benefit someone that's suffering from loose stool after antibiotics. So it's something to talk to your pharmacist about because I know they have some good background knowledge on that. But with that being said, I wouldn't go first to probiotics. I would focus on diet first and making sure you're getting that fiber in.
Okay, thanks.
Absolutely.
Marnie?
I was just gonna say, one of the things that I've been trying lately that's been really great for my poops is doing a low FODMAP diet. I don't know if you have any comments on that, but because I have a really high spinal cord injury, I know my food and my posture is not the greatest. So everything kind of sits in my upper gut, probably a bit longer than like the normal person. And changing to the low FODMAP has really made a huge difference for me.
There was it just
like-
does the low FODMAP is it beneficial?
Yeah, I guess that would be my question. If I'm missing something, maybe nutrition wise in that type of a diet, but
Yeah, so I mean the low FODMAP diet's usually encouraged for people with irritable bowel syndrome and finding those triggers, trigger foods. So within the context of spinal cord injuries, I am not aware of any evidence to say that it's better or worse for bowels. However, I think given that it is limiting because you're reducing the amount of FODMAPs in your diet, so that inevitably reduces the food choices, trying to really broaden and keep a variety of foods and to get different sources of vitamins and minerals from the plant-based foods would be appropriate.
Can I throw something in for Paul, basically on the colostomy front, because I had to get a colostomy.
Mm,
And I can tell you that it's actually fairly consistent. There's no issues. And the one thing that it allowed me to do was eat food that I couldn't eat before.
mm.
So there were certain foods that if I ate them, they would trigger bad reactions in my bowels. And with colostomy, it either doesn't do it anymore or it doesn't matter because it just goes into the colostomy bag and I don't have to worry about it, kind of thing.
Mhm.
So it's not, I'm not saying you should get one or anything like that. It was a long-term process for me to get one, but
Mhm.
it has been to some degree beneficial. I think that might be it for today.
Fantastic.
Oh, Sheldon, thank
Well,
you very, very much. You were great at answering all the questions and your presentation was good. Thank you very, very much for doing it for us. And I will see you around GF at some point. Okay, and for everybody else, I'll send you guys an email around what's going to happen next with the program, and we'll look towards the future. Thank you again, Sheldon.
fantastic.
Oh,
Yeah, thank
here.
you guys for having me. Really appreciate you inviting me out. This is an amazing opportunity, and thanks for your great questions. And if you do have ongoing questions regarding nutrition, that number 811, you can book one-on-one appointments with a dietitian. So if you have a list of questions or anything you really want to focus on, I think you may find some benefit in there. Or general practitioners or your family doctor can always put in a referral if it's needed to a dietitian. So always that avenue too. But anyways, thank you very much for having me. Much
Thanks,
appreciated.
Sheldon.
It was a pleasure to meet you all.